The scorching midday sun beat down mercilessly on Gabriella Winters as she stood trembling on the wooden auction platform, her wrists bound with coarse rope that bit into her skin. Her once beautiful emerald dress was now tattered and stained with dust from the long journey west. But even in her disheveled state, she maintained a quiet dignity that set her apart from the other merchandise being sold that day in Rhyolite, Nevada Territory, in the summer of 1876. Next up, this fine young woman, 20 years old, healthy and educated, can cook, clean, and read. Starting bid is $50. The auctioneer bellowed, his voice carrying across the dusty town square where a crowd of miners, travelers, and townsfolk had gathered for the human commerce that still persisted in some corners of the West, despite the Emancipation Proclamation. Gabriella bit her lip to keep from crying. Just 3 weeks ago, she had been the daughter of a respectable Boston merchant. Now her father was dead, his debts unpaid, and she had been transported west by his creditors to be sold to the highest bidder. The law might say she was an indentured servant and not a slave, but the difference felt meaningless as she stood exposed to leering gazes. $50, called out a burly miner with blackened teeth. 60, shouted another man whose breath she could smell even from the platform. 75. This from an older gentleman whose eyes lingered too long on the torn neckline of her dress. As the bidding continued, Gabriella's eyes scanned the crowd desperately, looking for any sign of mercy in a sea of indifference. That's when she noticed him at the edge of the gathering, a tall man with a weather-beaten face partially hidden beneath the wide brim of his Stetson. Unlike the others, he wasn't shouting or gesturing. He simply watched, his intense blue eyes fixed on her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. $150. The bid silenced the crowd. It came from the tall stranger who had now stepped forward, his spurs jingling softly as he moved, going once, going twice. Sold to the gentleman in the black hat. The auctioneer's gavel came down with a decisive crack that sealed Gabriella's fate. The tall cowboy approached the platform, paid the auctioneer in cash, and was handed the documents that transferred Gabriella's debt servitude to him. Only when he stood before her did she see his face clearly strong-jawed and sun-bronzed, with those piercing blue eyes that seemed to look straight through her. Zachary Ryder, he introduced himself simply, his voice low and gravelly as he untied her wrists with surprisingly gentle hands. My ranch is a day's ride from here. Gabriella rubbed her raw wrists, her voice barely a whisper. What will you expect of me? Instead of answering, Zachary guided her toward the meager shade of a nearby awning. He removed a canteen from his saddle and offered it to her. You'll rest in shade with me, he said, gesturing for her to drink. The desert heat kills the careless. We'll wait until evening to ride out. Gabriella accepted the water, confused by his lack of demands or threats. Why did you buy me? Zachary's eyes darkened momentarily. No one should be sold like cattle. He glanced around the town square where another auction was beginning, but that's a conversation for when we're away from here. For the first time since her father's death, Gabriella felt something other than despair, a flicker of cautious hope that perhaps this strange cowboy might be different from the others. But experience had taught her that hope was a luxury she couldn't afford. Whatever his reasons, she now belonged to Zachary Ryder, and her future lay in his hands. As the afternoon crawled by, they sat in relative silence under the awning of the general store. Zachary purchased a simple meal of bread and dried beef, which they shared as the town's activities continued around them. Several men cast envious glances in their direction, clearly disappointed they hadn't won the bidding for the beautiful Eastern woman. Can you ride? Zachary asked eventually, breaking the long silence. I learned as a girl, Gabriella replied. Though it's been some years, he nodded. Good, I bought a mare for you. She's gentle enough. Gabriella studied him, trying to understand this man who had purchased her freedom only to offer her water, food, and now a horse of her own. Mr. Ryder, Zach, he corrected. Just Zach out here. Zach, she repeated, the name feeling foreign on her tongue. I don't understand what you want from me. His blue eyes met hers directly. Right now, I want you to survive the journey to my ranch. After that, he shrugged. We'll figure it out. As the sun finally began its descent toward the western mountains, casting long shadows across Rhyolite's dusty Main Street, Zachary stood and offered his hand to help Gabriella to her feet. Time to go. He led her to where two horses were hitched, his own massive chestnut stallion and a smaller, dappled gray mare. With unexpected consideration, he helped her mount, ensuring she was securely seated before climbing onto his own horse. It's a long ride, he warned. But we'll make camp before midnight. As they rode out of Rhyolite, the town's ramshackle buildings and prying eyes falling behind them, Gabriella felt the first real breath of freedom enter her lungs in weeks. She had no idea what awaited her at Zachary Ryder's ranch, but as they rode side by side into the vast Nevada desert, the setting sun painting the landscape in hues of gold and crimson, she allowed herself a moment of gratitude simply to be away from the auction block. The desert night enveloped them like a cool blanket after the day's heat. Stars emerged in countless numbers across the vast blackness above, more stars than Gabriella had ever seen in Boston's skies. The only sounds were the steady rhythm of hoofbeats, the occasional call of a night bird, and the whisper of the breeze through the sparse vegetation. There, Zachary pointed toward a small outcropping of rocks. We'll camp there for the night. Once they reached the spot, he dismounted in one fluid motion and came to help Gabriella down from her mare. Her legs were stiff and sore from the hours of riding, and she stumbled slightly as her feet hit the ground. Zachary's strong hands caught her elbows, steadying her. "Thank you," she murmured, acutely aware of his proximity in the darkness. He nodded and stepped back, all business now as he began to set up their camp. Gabriella watched as he efficiently gathered scrub brush for a small fire, unpacked bedrolls, and tended to the horses. "Can I help?" she asked, feeling awkward standing idle. Zachary glanced at her, seeming to evaluate her capabilities. "Water the horses," he said, handing her a collapsible canvas bucket. "The canteens are still half full." Gabriella took the task gratefully, glad to have something useful to do. As she poured water for the thirsty animals, she couldn't help but notice how they responded to Zachary with respect, but without fear. His gentle murmurs to the stallion as he brushed him down revealed a man comfortable with caring for other living things. Once the camp was established and a small fire crackling, Zachary pulled some jerky and hardtack from his saddlebags. "Not much of a dinner," he apologized, offering her a share. "We'll have better at the ranch." Gabriella accepted the simple fare. "I'm grateful for anything," she said honestly. After the meager rations during her journey west, even this sparse meal felt like a feast. They ate in silence for a while, the fire casting flickering shadows across their faces. Finally, Gabriella gathered her courage. "You said earlier that we would talk about why you purchased me." When we were away from town, Zachary's expression remained impassive as he stared into the flames. For a long moment, she thought he might ignore her question altogether. Then he sighed, running a hand through his dark hair. 3 years ago, my sister was taken by men like those in Rhyolite," he said, his voice low and controlled, though Gabriella could hear the underlying tension. "She'd gone to Sacramento to work as a schoolteacher. When she didn't write for months, I went looking. Found out she'd been abducted, sold to a mining camp." His jaw tightened. "I was too late." "I'm sorry," Gabriella whispered, understanding blooming within her. Zachary's eyes reflected the dancing flames as he continued. "Since then, when I can, I do what I can. Some men buy horses. I buy people's freedom, so you don't intend to keep me as a servant." His eyes snapped to hers, suddenly fierce. "No person has the right to own another. Those papers I bought, they're yours to burn when we reach my ranch." Relief washed through Gabriella, so intense she felt lightheaded. "Then I'm free to go, anywhere I choose." Something flickered across his face, hesitation, perhaps. "Yes, though with no money and 1,000 miles from Boston." He shrugged. "You're welcome to stay until you decide what you want. I could use help around the ranch, paid help," he emphasized. Gabriella studied him across the fire, this enigmatic man who had spent a small fortune to free a stranger. "Why me?" she asked softly. "There were others at that auction." Zachary poked at the fire, sending sparks spiraling upward. "Couldn't save everyone," he said gruffly. Then, after a pause, "And you looked like you didn't belong there, like you still had fight in you despite everything." He stood abruptly, as if uncomfortable with the conversation's direction. "Get some sleep. We have another 6 hours of riding tomorrow." With that, he moved to the edge of their small camp, giving her privacy. Gabriella watched as he sat with his back against a boulder, rifle across his knees, eyes scanning the darkness beyond their fire's glow. As she settled onto the bedroll he'd prepared for her, Gabriella realized that for the first time in weeks, she felt safe. The man keeping watch over her sleep was still a mystery, but his actions spoke of honor and compassion, rare commodities in the brutal landscape of the West. Morning came with startling swiftness, the eastern sky blazing with color before the sun itself appeared. Gabriella woke to find Zachary already up, brewing coffee in a dented tin pot over a fresh fire. "You slept deep," he commented, handing her a cup of the strong, black coffee. "Good." "You needed it. Did you sleep at all?" she asked, noticing the shadows beneath his eyes. "Enough." He offered her more jerky for breakfast. "We'll reach the ranch by midday. Martha, my housekeeper, will have proper food waiting." As they rode through the morning, the landscape gradually changed from desert scrub to more verdant terrain. Small stands of trees appeared, and in the distance, Gabriella could see mountains rising, their slopes covered with pine forests. "Is your ranch in the mountains?" she asked, riding alongside Zachary. He nodded. "The foothills. Good grazing land, plenty of water." He pointed ahead. "See that valley? My land starts just beyond that ridge and runs all the way to the tree line on those mountains." Even to Gabriella's untrained eye, it looked like substantial property. "You must run many cattle." A ghost of a smile crossed Zachary's face. "Started with 12 head 7 years ago, now close to 800, plus 30 horses I breed and train." "You've done well for yourself," she observed. His smile faded. "Been fortunate. Not everyone out here gets the chances I had." They crested the ridge he'd pointed out, and suddenly the valley opened before them. Gabriella gasped at the vista. Rolling grasslands stretched toward distant mountains, a silver ribbon of river snaking through the center. Nestled against the foothills stood a large, well-constructed ranch house with several outbuildings and corrals. "Welcome to the Ryder Ranch," Zachary said, a note of pride in his voice. As they approached, Gabriella could see activity around the building's men working with horses in one of the corrals, smoke rising from the house chimney. A dog noticed their approach and began barking, which brought a gray-haired woman to the front porch. "That's Martha," Zachary explained. "Been with me since I started the ranch. She's opinionated but good-hearted." Martha shaded her eyes against the sun as they rode into the yard, her expression curious as she took in Gabriella's presence. 3 ranch hands stopped their work to watch as well, their faces showing varying degrees of surprise. Zachary dismounted and helped Gabriella down from her mare before addressing his housekeeper. "Martha, this is Miss Gabriella Winters. She'll be staying with us for a while." Martha's eyebrows rose nearly to her hairline, but she quickly composed her features. "Welcome, Miss Winters. You must be exhausted from traveling with this one." She jerked her thumb toward Zachary. "He forgets not everyone's made of leather and grit like him." Gabriella couldn't help but smile at the woman's forthright manner. "Thank you. I am rather tired." "I'll have a bath drawn for you right away," Martha declared, taking charge. She shot Zachary a look that clearly communicated they would be having words later, then ushered Gabriella toward the house. The interior of the ranch house surprised Gabriella. While not luxurious, it was well built and comfortably furnished, a far cry from the rough frontier dwelling she had imagined. Wide windows let in ample light, polished wood floors gleamed, and shelves lined with books occupied one entire wall of the main room. "The boss is quite the reader," Martha commented, noticing Gabriella's interest in the library. "Sends away to San Francisco for books regular as clockwork." She led Gabriella up a sturdy staircase. "You'll stay in the guest room. It hasn't seen much use, but I keep it ready." The guest room was small but pleasant, with a real bed covered in a colorful quilt, a washstand with pitcher and bowl, and a small dresser. A window overlooked the valley, framing a view that would have cost a fortune in a Boston home. "I'll have that bath ready in the kitchen in half an hour," Martha said. There's a robe there you can use. I'll see what I can find for you to wear until we can make you something proper." Left alone, Gabriella sank onto the bed, overwhelmed by the rapid changes in her circumstances. Just yesterday, she had stood on an auction block, her future looking bleaker than death. Now she sat in a clean room, promised a bath and fresh clothes, her freedom restored by a man who asked nothing in return. It seemed too good to be true, and experience had taught Gabriella that things that seemed too good to be true usually were. Yet something about Zachary Ryder's straightforward manner made her want to trust him, despite her wariness. The promised bath proved to be everything Gabriella had hoped for: hot water in a large copper tub, scented with what smelled like lavender, and blissful privacy behind a screen in the warm kitchen. She scrubbed away weeks of grime and fear, allowing herself to feel human again. Martha had found her a simple blue dress that, while a bit large, was clean and whole. "It belonged to Zachary's sister," she explained quietly as she helped Gabriella with the buttons. "Been packed away these past years." Gabriella stilled. "He told me about his sister. I'm sorry for his loss." "Are you sure it's appropriate for me to wear her clothes?" Martha's weathered face softened. He wouldn't have offered if he didn't mean it, and Sarah would have liked knowing her things helped another young woman in need. Clean, dressed, and with her hair neatly braided, Gabriella felt transformed. Martha led her to the dining room where a simple but abundant meal awaited: roast chicken, potatoes, fresh bread, and preserved peaches. "Eat," Martha commanded. "You're too thin by half." Zachary joined them shortly, having cleaned up as well. He'd shaved and changed into clean clothes, and without the trail dust, Gabriella could see he was younger than she'd initially thought, perhaps 30. With strong features that would have been handsome if not for the perpetual gravity in his expression. He stopped short when he saw her, something unreadable flashing in his eyes. "The dress suits you," he said after a moment. "Sarah would have approved." "Thank you for lending it to me," Gabriella replied, "and for everything else." They ate mostly in silence, with Martha occasionally filling the quiet with news about the ranch: a new foal born the previous week, the progress of the vegetable garden, the approaching cattle drive to the railhead in 2 months' time. After the meal, Zachary excused himself to check on ranch operations, leaving Gabriella with Martha. The older woman studied her thoughtfully as they cleared the table. "He didn't tell me where he found you," Martha said finally, her tone careful. Gabriella hesitated, unsure how much Zachary had shared. "In Rhyolite." Martha's hands stilled on the dishes. "The auction," she said, not a question. Gabriella nodded, feeling heat rise to her cheeks. "That's the 3rd time in as many years," Martha sighed. "First that Chinese girl he helped get to San Francisco, then the miner's widow and her child." "He told me about his sister," Gabriella said quietly. Martha nodded. "Changed him. Before, he was different," laughed more, "had big dreams beyond just the ranch." She stacked plates with practiced efficiency. "Still a good man, maybe even better in some ways, but carries too much on his shoulders." "He said I'm free to go when I choose," Gabriella ventured. "And so you are," Martha confirmed. "Though where you'd go with no money and not knowing the territory." She shook her head. "My advice, stay a while. Ranch always needs extra hands, especially with the women's work: cooking for the hands, mending, preserving for winter. I'm not as young as I was." Gabriella considered this. "I don't want charity." Martha laughed outright. "Charity? Girl, this is the frontier. Nobody survives on charity out here. You work, you eat. Simple as that." The practicality of this arrangement appealed to Gabriella. She had no money, no connections, and only the vaguest idea of how to survive in this unfamiliar territory. Staying at the Ryder Ranch, at least temporarily, seemed her best option. "If Mr. Ryder agrees, I would be grateful for the opportunity to earn my keep," she said finally. Martha's weathered face broke into a smile. "Good. Now let me show you around this place before you fall asleep on your feet." The tour revealed a well-established operation, a large barn housing both workhorses and Zachary's prized breeding stock, bunkhouses for the ranch hands, a smokehouse, storage buildings, and corrals. Beyond the immediate complex stretched fenced pastures where cattle grazed on lush grass. 6 men work here year-round, Martha explained. More during roundup and drives, Most have been with Zach since the beginning, loyal to him because he treats them fair and pays better than most. As they walked back toward the house, Gabriella spotted Zachary in one of the corrals, working with a young horse. He moved with confidence and patience, his focus entirely on the nervous animal circling him. "He has a way with the troubled ones," Martha commented, following Gabriella's gaze. "People too, though he'd never admit it." That evening, after a simple supper, Gabriella found herself alone with Zachary on the front porch. The sunset painted the valley in gold and purple, while the first stars appeared in the deepening blue above the mountains. "I spoke with Martha about staying," she said, breaking the comfortable silence. "If you agree, I'd like to work here properly for wages until I decide what comes next." Zachary nodded, unsurprised. Martha's been wanting help for a while. "Ranch keeps growing and she's not getting any younger, though don't tell her I said so." His lips quirked in what almost became a smile. "We can discuss terms tomorrow. For now, you should rest. Thank you." Gabriella hesitated, then added, "I want you to know I understand what you did for me." Not everyone would have. Zachary's expression remained unreadable in the fading light. "Get some sleep, Miss Winters. Tomorrow's soon enough to start your new life." As Gabriella settled into the comfortable bed that night, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch settling around her, she felt something she hadn't experienced in too long. Hope. Whatever the future held, at least for now, she had found safe harbor. The next morning, true to his word, Zachary formally hired Gabriella as Martha's assistant. Her wages were fair $15 per month plus room and board, with Sundays free. "You'll help Martha with the house, cooking for the hands, mending, and whatever else needs doing," he explained over breakfast. "In time, if you've interest, you can learn other aspects of ranch work." "I'd like that," Gabriella said honestly. Growing up in Boston, she had led a sheltered life where women's work was strictly defined. The frontier seemed to offer more flexibility, born of necessity rather than social custom. "First things first," Martha declared. "We need to get you proper clothes. Can't be working in borrowed finery." Over the next few days, Gabriella settled into life at the Ryder Ranch. Martha proved to be a patient teacher, showing her the rhythms and routines that kept the operation running smoothly. Gabriella learned to cook on the massive cast iron stove, to make bread that satisfied hungry ranch hands, to preserve the bounty from Martha's well-tended garden, and to mend everything from shirts to saddle blankets. She saw little of Zachary during daylight hours. He left the house before dawn each morning and returned only for the evening meal, often continuing to work with accounts or correspondence afterward. He was unfailingly polite, but maintained a careful distance, rarely engaging in personal conversation. The ranch hands Tom, Diego, Frank, Samuel, Illy, and Hank were initially curious about the Eastern woman suddenly in their midst, but they quickly accepted her presence as they might any other change in ranch routine. Gabriella learned each man's preferences and quirks: Diego's love of spicy food, Tom's sweet tooth, Hank's fondness for extra coffee at breakfast. One evening, about 2 weeks after her arrival, Gabriella was hanging laundry on the line behind the house when she heard the pounding of hooves. Looking up, she saw Zachary galloping across the pasture on his stallion, silhouetted against the setting sun. Man and horse moved as one, powerful and free in a way that made her breath catch. Martha appeared beside her, handing her another sheet to hang. "Impressive, isn't he?" the older woman said with a knowing look. Gabriella felt heat rise to her cheeks. "The horse is magnificent." "Wasn't talking about the horse," Martha chuckled, "though Thunder is a fine animal." "Mr. Ryder is my employer," Gabriella said primly, focusing intently on smoothing wrinkles from the wet sheet. "Of course he is," Martha replied, her tone innocent but her eyes twinkling. "Just like he's been just an employer to every eligible woman within 50 miles since he established this ranch. None of them caught his eye either." "I wasn't aware I was trying to catch his eye," Gabriella protested. Martha patted her arm. "You will be, dear. Give it time." Before Gabriella could formulate a response, Martha had bustled back to the house, leaving her with the laundry and unsettling thoughts. She had to admit there was something compelling about Zachary Ryder, his quiet competence, his evident care for those under his protection, the rare moments when his guard dropped and she glimpsed the man beneath the stoic exterior. But romantic notions were foolish, she reminded herself. She needed to focus on building her new life, on becoming self-sufficient in this unfamiliar world. Zachary had given her freedom and opportunity. To expect more would be ungrateful and presumptuous. Still, as she watched him ride toward the stables, she couldn't quite suppress the flutter in her chest or the way her eyes lingered on his tall figure. The following Sunday afternoon, Gabriella sat on the front porch with a book borrowed from Zachary's library, a collection of Emerson's essays. The day was pleasantly warm, with a gentle breeze carrying the scent of pine from the distant mountains. Martha had gone to visit her sister in the nearby town of Pine Ridge, leaving Gabriella to enjoy her day off in solitude. Or so she thought, until the creak of the porch boards announced Zachary's presence. He carried a fishing pole in one hand and a small canvas bag in the other. "Good book?" he asked, nodding toward Emerson. "Yes, though challenging in parts," she admitted. "You have an impressive library." Something like pleasure flickered across his face. "Books are windows to places we might never see ourselves." He seemed to hesitate before adding, "I'm heading to the river to fish. There's a nice spot about a mile downstream. You're welcome to join me if you'd like a change of scenery." The unexpected invitation surprised her. "I wouldn't want to intrude on your day." "Wouldn't have asked if it was an intrusion," he said simply. "But no obligation," Gabriella considered for only a moment. "I'd like that. I've never been fishing." 20 minutes later, they walked side by side along a well-worn path that followed the river. Zachary had saddled a gentle mare for Gabriella, but she'd opted to walk, wanting to explore this new territory properly. "Have you always lived in Nevada territory?" she asked as they made their way downstream. Zachary shook his head. "Born in Missouri, came west after the war. I was too young to fight, but old enough to see what it did to my hometown." He glanced at her. "You're from Boston," Martha said. "Yes, my father was a merchant textiles mostly." "When he died," she trailed off, the memory still painful. "His partners claimed he owed them substantial debts. They seized everything, including me, apparently." Zachary's jaw tightened. "That's not legal." "Perhaps not in theory, in practice," she shrugged. "Without family or funds to challenge them, I had little recourse." They walked in silence for a while before Zachary spoke again. "Law's still catching up to the reality out here. Some men take advantage of the gaps. And some men try to fill them," she countered softly. "Like you." He looked uncomfortable with her assessment. "Here we are," he said, changing the subject as they reached a bend in the river where the water formed a deep, calm pool. The spot was beautiful, shaded by cottonwood trees, with flat rocks perfect for sitting alongside the water. Zachary showed Gabriella how to bait a hook and cast the line, his hands briefly covering hers as he demonstrated the proper motion. "Now we wait," he said, settling on a rock beside her after casting his own line. The peaceful setting and the rhythm of fishing seemed to loosen something in Zachary. As the afternoon progressed, he began to share stories of his early days establishing the ranch, the harsh winter when he nearly lost everything, the first successful drive to the railhead. The time thunder saved him from a flash flood. Gabriella, in turn, told him about growing up in Boston, her education at a small ladies' academy, her love of literature and art, and her father's business that had once been prosperous before a series of bad investments. "I was to be engaged to my father's partner's son," she admitted. "The agreement was nearly finalized when father died. Afterward, Andrew claimed no knowledge of any arrangement. That's when they seized the house and everything in it. This Andrew, he was part of sending you west." Zachary's tone had darkened. Gabriella nodded. "I believe it was his idea. He always resented that I preferred books to his company." "Some men can't stand a woman with a mind of her own," Zachary said, reeling in a good-sized trout. "Their loss." The simple statement, delivered matter-of-factly as he unhooked his catch, warmed Gabriella more than she cared to admit. They returned to the ranch with 4 trout, which Gabriella learned to clean under Zachary's patient instruction. Together, they prepared a simple but delicious meal, and for the first time since her arrival, they ate alone together in the dining room, Martha still visiting in town. The conversation flowed more easily now, the afternoon having broken down some of the careful barriers between them. Zachary asked thoughtful questions about her interests and opinions, listening to her answers with genuine attention. "You surprise me, Mr. Ryder," Gabriella said as they cleared the table together. "Zach," he corrected again. "And how's that? You're not what I expected a rancher to be. You're well-read, thoughtful, interested in ideas beyond cattle and horses." A rare smile crossed his face, transforming his features. "And you're not what I expected an Eastern lady to be. You've adapted to ranch life with more grace than most born to it." Their eyes met across the table, and something shifted in the air between them, a recognition, perhaps, that they were seeing each other clearly for the first time. The moment was broken by the sound of hooves in the yard. Zachary moved to the window. "Martha's back," he announced, and the spell was broken. That night, lying in bed, Gabriella found herself replaying the day in her mind, the sunlight filtering through leaves, the quiet companionship, the way Zachary's rare smile transformed his face. She was treading dangerous ground, she knew. Developing feelings for her employer could only lead to complications. Yet as she drifted toward sleep, she couldn't help but wonder if the warmth in his blue eyes when he looked at her might mean he was facing a similar struggle. The following weeks brought gradual but noticeable changes. Zachary began taking his evening meals with Gabriella and Martha more regularly, rather than eating quickly and returning to work. Occasionally, he would ask Gabriella's opinion on a passage in a book or show her maps of the territory, explaining the ranch's operations in greater detail. For her part, Gabriella found herself looking forward to these evening conversations, to the moments when Zachary's guard lowered enough to reveal the thoughtful, even gentle man beneath the taciturn exterior. Martha observed these developments with poorly concealed satisfaction, finding increasingly transparent excuses to leave them alone together. "My old bones need rest," she would declare, despite having outworked everyone else during the day. Or, "I promised to take this pie to Ellie's wife," though no one had seen her baking a second pie. One evening in late September, with autumn painting the valley in golds and reds, Zachary found Gabriella on the porch after supper. The air held the first hint of the coming winter's chill. "I need to ride to Carson City tomorrow," he said, leaning against the porch railing. "Banking, business, supplies, mail. It's a 2-day trip." Gabriella nodded, wondering why he was telling her specifically rather than making a general announcement. "I thought," he continued, seeming uncharacteristically hesitant, "you might want to come along, see more of the territory. There's a bookshop in Carson City that gets new titles from back east." The invitation surprised and pleased her. "I would like that very much." His expression relaxed slightly. "Good, we'll leave at first light." They set out the next morning under a sky just beginning to lighten with dawn. Zachary had saddled the gray mare for Gabriella and packed provisions for the journey. Martha had provided them with enough food for a week, despite the short duration of their trip, and had winked broadly at Gabriella as they departed. The ride to Carson City took them through changing terrain, grassy valleys giving way to pine forests, rocky outcroppings, and finally the more settled areas approaching Nevada's capital. Zachary proved to be a knowledgeable guide, pointing out landmarks and sharing the history of the region. Away from the ranch, he seemed more relaxed, almost boyish at times when something caught his interest. They reached Carson City by late afternoon and secured rooms at a respectable hotel. After refreshing themselves, Zachary took Gabriella to dinner at the finest restaurant in town, a far cry from the simple meals at the ranch, with white tablecloths, multiple courses, and even a bottle of wine. "This is lovely," Gabriella said, looking around at the elegant surroundings. "Though I feel rather underdressed." Her practical traveling clothes, while clean and well-made, were hardly suitable for fine dining. "You look perfect," Zachary said, then immediately seemed embarrassed by the forthright compliment. "That is, you look perfectly appropriate. Carson City isn't San Francisco, they're used to ranchers and miners here." The slight flush on his tanned cheeks endeared him to her even more. This powerful man, so confident in every other setting, could be flustered by a simple exchange over dinner. The following day was filled with Zachary's business meetings at the bank, orders placed with merchants for ranch supplies, discussions with the agent who handled his cattle sales. Throughout it all, he included Gabriella, introducing her to his business associates and soliciting her opinions. "You have a good head for numbers," he commented after she'd spotted a discrepancy in one of the supply invoices. "Father insisted I learn bookkeeping," she explained. "He said a merchant's daughter should understand business, even if society expected her only to manage a household." "Wise man, your father," Zachary said. "Too many people waste the talents of half the population because they're women." As promised, he took her to the bookshop, a small but well-stocked establishment tucked between a hardware store and a dressmaker's. The proprietor greeted Zachary warmly, clearly a regular customer. "Mr. Ryder, your order arrived just last week, Thoreau's Walden and that new Mark Twain collection. Perfect timing, Mr. Harrison, and I've brought someone who appreciates good books even more than I do." "This is Miss Winters." The bookseller beamed at Gabriella. "A pleasure, Miss Winters. Any friend of Mr. Ryder's is welcome here. Please browse as long as you like." Zachary watched with evident pleasure as Gabriella explored the shelves, running her fingers lovingly over leather spines and cloth bindings. "Choose whatever you like," he told her. "Consider it payment for helping with the accounts today." Despite her protests that her assistance hardly warranted such generosity, Gabriella eventually selected 3 volumes, a collection of Wordsworth's poetry, a novel by George Eliot, and a history of the Western Territories. Their last stop before heading back to the ranch was the dressmaker's shop, where Zachary insisted on ordering Gabriella 2 new dresses and a warm cloak for the coming winter. "Martha's hand-me-downs and altered clothes have served well enough," he said when she objected to the expense, "but you should have things made for you properly." "I can pay for my own clothes from my wages," Gabriella insisted. Zachary's expression grew serious. "Consider it recompense for what was taken from you. The dresses you arrived in, the possessions you lost, I can't restore all of it, but I can do this." Put that way, Gabriella found she couldn't refuse. She allowed the dressmaker to take her measurements and selected fabrics for a practical everyday dress, a warmer winter dress, and a cloak lined with soft wool. As they rode home the following day, Gabriella felt a contentment she hadn't experienced since before her father's death. The books and the promise of new clothes were pleasant, but more meaningful was the way Zachary had treated her throughout their journey as an equal, a partner whose opinions and company he valued. The ranch came into view just as the sun was setting, the windows of the house glowing with welcoming light. For the first time since her arrival, Gabriella found herself thinking of it as home. October brought crisp mornings, golden afternoons, and the cattle roundup in preparation for winter. The ranch hummed with activity as the herd was gathered, counted, and the healthiest calves selected for market. Additional hands arrived to help with the work, filling the bunkhouses and keeping Martha and Gabriella busy from dawn until well after dark, feeding the hungry men. Despite the increased workload, Gabriella found herself enjoying the sense of purpose and community. The men treated her with respect, appreciative of the hearty meals and clean, mended clothes she provided alongside Martha. She began to learn the rhythm of ranch life, the seasonal cycles that governed everything from breeding to market sales. Zachary worked longer hours than anyone, returning to the house exhausted each evening, sometimes too tired for more than a brief exchange before seeking his bed. Yet even in his fatigue, he made time to ask about Gabriella's day, to share some observation or plan with her. One crisp morning in late October, Gabriella rose before dawn to help Martha prepare breakfast for the hands. As she crossed the yard to the smokehouse for bacon, she noticed light in the stables. Curious, she detoured to investigate. Zachary was there, examining the leg of a chestnut mare. The horse was clearly in distress, sweating despite the morning chill, her eyes showing white around the edges. "Is she ill?" Gabriella asked softly, not wanting to startle either animal or man. Zachary glanced up, unsurprised by her presence. "Stepped in a gopher hole yesterday. The swelling's worse this morning." His face showed concern beyond what might be expected for a work animal. She's one of my best brood mares. Sweet temperament passes it to her foals. Can I help? Gabriella offered. Zachary seemed about to refuse, then reconsidered. Actually, yes. Can you keep her calm while I check how serious it is? For the next hour, Gabriella stood at the mare's head, stroking her neck and murmuring soothing words while Zachary carefully examined, cleaned, and finally wrapped the injured leg. You have a way with horses, he commented as they finished. She stayed calmer for you than she would have for most of the hands. I've always connected well with animals, Gabriella admitted. They respond to patience and kindness just like people. Zachary studied her for a moment, something unreadable in his expression. You continue to surprise me, Gabriella Winters. It was the first time he'd used her given name, and the sound of it in his deep voice sent an unexpected warmth through her. As you surprise me, Zachary Ryder, she replied softly. Their eyes held for a long moment, the air between them charged with unspoken feelings. Then the mare shifted, breaking the spell, and they both stepped back, suddenly aware of the intimacy of the moment. I should help Martha with breakfast, Gabriella said, smoothing her apron. Zachary nodded. I need to check on the north pasture fence before the men head out. He hesitated, then added, Thank you for your help. The simple acknowledgement carried more weight than the words themselves might suggest. As Gabriella hurried back to the house, she realized something had shifted between them, some barrier had lowered, allowing a glimpse of the connection forming beneath their carefully maintained roles of employer and employee. The roundup concluded successfully by mid-November, with most of the cattle driven to winter pastures closer to the ranch buildings, where they could be more easily fed and monitored during the coming snow. The extra hands departed, leaving the core group of 6 permanent ranch hands plus Zachary, Martha, and Gabriella. Winter arrived in earnest the week before Thanksgiving, with a 3-day blizzard that left the ranch blanketed in 2 feet of snow. During the storm, everyone worked frantically to ensure the animals were sheltered and fed, the water sources kept from freezing, and the ranch buildings secure against the howling wind. On the 3rd night, with the storm still raging, Gabriella sat beside the fire in the main room, mending shirts by lamplight. Martha had retired early, complaining of aching joints from the cold, leaving Gabriella alone with her thoughts and the storm's fury. The door opened suddenly, admitting a blast of frigid air and a snow-covered Zachary. He stamped his boots and removed his heavy coat, his face red from the cold, his dark hair dusted with melting snowflakes. You're still up, he said, sounding pleased despite his evident exhaustion. Someone needs to make sure you don't freeze to death checking on animals in the middle of a blizzard, she replied, trying to sound stern but unable to hide her concern. He smiled, one of his rare, full smiles that transformed his face. Your concern is noted, Miss Winters. He moved to the fire, holding his hands to the warmth. All secure in the barns, the horses are fine, cattle huddled together in the sheltered areas. We won't lose many, if any. That's good news. Gabriella set aside her mending. Sit, I'll make you some coffee. When she returned with the steaming cup, Zachary had settled into the chair opposite hers, his long legs stretched toward the fire, his features relaxed in a way she rarely saw. Thank you. He accepted the coffee gratefully. Not just for this, for everything these past months. You've become indispensable to the ranch. I enjoy the work, she said honestly. It's satisfying in a way I never expected. You've changed since you arrived, he observed. Stronger, more confident, Gabriella considered this. I suppose I have. Necessity is a powerful teacher. As is freedom. Zachary's blue eyes reflected the dancing flames. You've flourished here because you're free to be yourself, not what others expect. Is that why you stay? She asked. The freedom of the frontier, something darkened in his expression. Partly. And because I have responsibilities to the land, the animals, the men who depend on me. But not to yourself. The question slipped out before she could consider its presumption. Zachary studied her for a long moment. What do you mean? Gabriella chose her words carefully. You work constantly for others, the ranch, the hands, even strangers like me. When do you allow yourself happiness just for its own sake? I'm content with my life, he said, but the words sounded rehearsed, as if he'd told himself the same thing many times. Content isn't the same as happy, she pointed out gently. He looked away, staring into the fire. For a moment, she thought he might not respond, might retreat behind the walls he maintained so carefully. I was happy once, he said finally, his voice so low she had to lean forward to hear him over the crackling fire and howling wind. Before my sister died, before I understood how cruel the world can be to those without protection. Gabriella's heart ached for him, and since then, I've found purpose in building something lasting, in making a small corner of the world safer for those in my care. He looked at her directly. But happiness, that seemed, selfish somehow, unearned. Why unearned? She pressed, sensing they were approaching something vital. I couldn't save Sarah. The words emerged rough, as if torn from him. I was too late. What right do I have to happiness when she never had the chance? Understanding bloomed within Gabriella. This was the weight he carried, the ghost that haunted his quiet moments. Do you think she would want you to punish yourself forever? To deny yourself joy because she lost hers? Zachary's expression shifted, surprise giving way to thoughtfulness. I've never considered it that way. Perhaps it's time you did. Gabriella reached across the space between them, touching his hand gently. Living fully honors those we've lost more than perpetual mourning ever could. His fingers curled around hers, warm and calloused. You're a wise woman, Gabriella Winters. Not wise, she demurred. Just someone who's also had to rebuild a life from ashes. They sat in comfortable silence, hands still joined as the fire burned low and the storm gradually subsided outside. Something had changed between them, a truth acknowledged, a connection deepened beyond employer and employee, beyond even friendship. When Gabriella finally rose to retire for the night, Zachary stood as well, still holding her hand. Thank you, he said simply. She smiled up at him, suddenly aware of how close they stood. For what? For seeing what I couldn't. His eyes held hers, and for a breathless moment she thought he might close the distance between them. Instead, he raised her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. Good night, Gabriella. Good night, Zach, she whispered, and made her way upstairs, her hand still tingling from the touch of his lips, her heart racing with possibilities newly awakened. The blizzard passed, leaving a transformed landscape of pristine white broken only by the paths shoveled between buildings. Ranch activities continued at a slower pace, with the men focusing on maintenance tasks that had been postponed during busier seasons. In the weeks leading up to Christmas, the atmosphere in the ranch house grew festive. Martha enlisted Gabriella's help in baking traditional holiday treats, making decorations from pine boughs and berries, and planning a Christmas dinner for all the ranch hands. First Christmas in 3 years that Zach seemed interested in celebrating, Martha confided as they made paper stars for the small tree Zachary had cut and brought into the house. Used to just be another day, far as he was concerned. What's changed this year? Gabriella asked, though she suspected she knew the answer. Martha just smiled knowingly and handed her more colored paper. On Christmas Eve, with snow falling gently outside, the ranch hands gathered in the main house for a special dinner. Martha and Gabriella had outdone themselves: roast beef, potatoes, fresh bread, preserved vegetables from the summer garden, and 3 different pies for dessert. The normally reserved ranch hands grew merry with good food and the small glasses of whiskey Zachary distributed for the occasion. Stories were shared, laughter filled the usually quiet house, and even Zachary seemed relaxed and content, seated at the head of the table with Gabriella to his right. After dinner, to everyone's surprise, Diego produced a battered violin and began to play traditional dance tunes. The furniture was pushed back, and despite the limited space, impromptu dancing broke out. Hank and Tom demonstrated a lively jig, while Frank persuaded a blushing Martha to join him in a waltz. Zachary watched from the sidelines until Diego struck up a slower melody. Then, with a formality that silenced the room, he approached Gabriella. "May I have this dance?" he asked, extending his hand. The room seemed to hold its breath as Gabriella placed her hand in his. "You may." He led her to the center of the cleared space, one hand at her waist, the other holding hers properly. He moved with unexpected grace for such a tall man, guiding her through the simple steps with confidence. I didn't know you danced, she murmured, aware of the eyes watching them but focused entirely on the man before her. My mother insisted I learn, he replied, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Said no son of hers would stomp around a dance floor like an unbroken colt. Gabriella laughed, delighted by this glimpse of his past. She was wise. You dance beautifully. As do you, he returned, his eyes never leaving hers as they moved in perfect harmony. The dance ended too soon, but the feeling it created lingered long after the ranch hands had returned to their quarters, and the house grew quiet. Gabriella found herself unable to sleep, replaying the evening in her mind, the warm firelight, the music, the solid strength of Zachary's hand at her waist. Christmas morning dawned clear and cold. After a simple breakfast, gifts were exchanged, practical items mostly, with occasional touches of whimsy. Martha received a new shawl from Zachary and a set of hair combs from Gabriella. The ranch hands were given new gloves, knives, or books, depending on their preferences. Gabriella unwrapped a beautiful leather-bound journal from Martha and a pair of warm riding gloves from the hands. From Zachary came two packages, one containing a fine woolen scarf in deep blue, the other a small wooden box. Open it, he encouraged when she hesitated. Inside lay a delicate silver pendant, a small horse rendered in exquisite detail, suspended on a slender chain. It's beautiful, she breathed, touching it gently. I've never owned anything so fine. The silversmith in Carson City made it, Zachary explained. I commissioned it when we visited. He looked suddenly uncertain. If it's too forward, no, she interrupted, meeting his eyes. It's perfect. Would you help me put it on? Zachary carefully fastened the chain around her neck, his fingers brushing her skin briefly. The small contact sent warmth cascading through her. I have something for you as well, she said, retrieving a package wrapped in brown paper and tied with string. Though it's nowhere near as lovely as your gift, Zachary unwrapped it carefully to reveal a hand-knitted scarf in deep green wool. You made this? He asked, running his fingers over the even stitches. Gabriella nodded. Martha taught me. It's my first attempt, so the pattern is simple. It's perfect, he echoed her earlier words, immediately wrapping it around his neck. Thank you. His genuine appreciation for her modest gift touched her deeply. This man, who could afford fine silver jewelry, valued her handmade scarf with equal sincerity. The remainder of the holiday passed in contented quiet. Zachary spent more time in the house than usual, reading by the fire or engaging Gabriella in games of chess. They talked more freely now, the dance at Christmas Eve having shifted something fundamental between them. New Year's Eve arrived with another light snowfall. The ranch hands had ridden into Pine Ridge for the town celebration, and Martha retired early, leaving Zachary and Gabriella alone in the main room as midnight approached. Any resolutions for the new year? Zachary asked, pouring them each a small glass of brandy from his rarely touched supply. Gabriella considered the question. To continue learning, about the ranch, about this territory, about myself. She accepted the glass he offered. And you, he gazed into the fire for a long moment. To honor what you said during the blizzard, to allow myself to live fully, not just exist. That's a worthy resolution, she said softly. I have you to thank for it. He raised his glass. To new beginnings. To new beginnings, she echoed, sipping the brandy. Outside, the distant sound of gunshots indicated midnight had arrived in Pine Ridge, the new year of 1877 beginning with traditional frontier celebration. Happy New Year, Gabriella, Zachary said, his voice low and intimate in the quiet room. Happy New Year, Zach. She set her glass aside, suddenly nervous but determined. Before she could reconsider, she leaned forward and pressed a soft kiss to his cheek. For luck, she whispered. Zachary caught her hand as she began to withdraw, keeping her close. His eyes searched hers, questioning, hopeful. When she didn't pull away, he gently cupped her face with his free hand. Gabriella, he breathed, and then his lips were on hers, tentative at first, then more certain as she responded. The kiss was everything she had imagined and more tender yet passionate, a perfect expression of the feelings that had been building between them for months. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Zachary rested his forehead against hers. I've wanted to do that since Carson City, he admitted. Gabriella smiled. I've wanted you to since the day you taught me to fish. He laughed softly, the sound warming her more than the fire or brandy. We've wasted time then. Not wasted, she corrected. We needed that time to know our own hearts. And do you know yours now? He asked, suddenly serious. She met his gaze steadily. I do, my heart is here, Zach. With you, with this life we've built. His arms tightened around her. I never expected to find you. After Sarah, I thought. I believed I was meant to be alone, to atone through solitary good works. And now I understand what you tried to tell me, that living fully, loving fully, honors those we've lost. He kissed her again, briefly but with feeling. I love you, Gabriella Winters. I think I have since the moment you stood on that auction platform, defiant despite everything. Joy bloomed within her, bright and boundless. And I love you, Zachary Ryder, not for saving me, but for seeing me, truly seeing me when no one else did. They remained by the fire long into the night, talking, planning, dreaming of a future neither had dared imagine just months before. When Martha found them asleep in their chairs the next morning, hands still joined, she merely smiled and quietly prepared breakfast, careful not to wake them. Winter gave way to spring, the snow melting to reveal green shoots pushing through the dark earth. The ranch awakened from its seasonal dormancy, with new calves and foals appearing daily, fields being prepared for planting, and the constant work of maintaining fences and buildings after the harsh weather. Gabriella and Zachary's relationship blossomed alongside the season. Their engagement was announced in February, to the surprise of no one at the ranch. Martha had immediately begun preparations for a June wedding, declaring that the bride needed a proper dress, and the ranch house a thorough cleaning before any ceremony could take place. In late April, Gabriella accompanied Zachary to Rhyolite on ranch business. It was her first time returning to the town where they had met, and she approached it with mixed emotions. We don't have to go, Zachary said, sensing her unease as the town came into view. I can handle the business alone. No, she said firmly. I need to see it again to remind myself how far I've come, how much has changed. Rhyolite looked smaller than she remembered, the dusty streets and weathered buildings less imposing now that she viewed them from a position of security rather than desperation. They conducted their business efficiently, supplies ordered, mail collected, arrangements made for the spring cattle drive. As they prepared to leave, Gabriella's attention was caught by activity in the town square, the same place where she had stood on the auction block nearly a year before. A crowd was gathering, and the familiar voice of an auctioneer carried to where they stood. Zach, she said, gripping his arm, there's another auction. He followed her gaze, his expression hardening. Stay here, he instructed, but Gabriella shook her head. No, I'm coming with you. Together they approached the edge of the crowd. On the platform stood a young Chinese woman, perhaps 18 or 19, her eyes downcast, her hands bound just as Gabriella's had been. Who's selling her? Zachary asked a man nearby, his voice controlled but tight with anger. The man shrugged. Mining company found her trying to steal food. Say she owes them for damage to their property when she was caught. Starting bids, $30. Zachary and Gabriella exchanged a look of perfect understanding. Without a word, he moved through the crowd toward the auctioneer while she remained at the edge, watching. The bidding was brief, with Zachary offering $70, far more than anyone else was willing to pay for a Chinese woman in a territory where anti-Asian sentiment ran high. Within minutes, he was leading the young woman through the crowd toward where Gabriella waited. Miss Lynn, this is my fiancée, Miss Winters, he said gently, using his knife to cut the ropes binding the woman's wrists. We're going to help you. Thank you, Miss Lynn whispered, her English heavily accented but understandable. I can work, cook, clean, so. We know you can, Gabriella said, taking the young woman's hand. But first you need rest and food, then we'll discuss what you want to do next. As they left Rhyolite, Gabriella couldn't help but reflect on the symmetry of the moment leaving town with Zachary, a freed woman beside them, heading toward the safety of the ranch. But this time, she rode as his equal, his partner in the act of kindness rather than its recipient. What are you thinking? Zachary asked as they made camp that evening, Miss Lynn already asleep after a hot meal and the emotional exhaustion of the day. That things come full circle, Gabriella replied, nestling against him as they sat by the fire. And that small acts of justice matter, even in a world that often seems indifferent to suffering. They do, he agreed, kissing the top of her head. One person at a time, we make the world a little better. We, she repeated, savoring the word and all it represented: partnership, shared purpose, love expressed through action as well as words. The wedding took place on the first Saturday in June, with the ranch bedecked in wildflowers and early summer blooms. Judge Anderson rode from Pine Ridge to perform the ceremony, bringing his wife and several other townspeople with him. Miss Lynn, now employed as Martha's assistant while she saved money and made plans to reunite with relatives in San Francisco, helped decorate the house and prepare the feast that followed. Gabriella wore a gown of cream-colored silk that Martha had ordered specially from Carson City, with a crown of wildflowers in her dark hair. Zachary, usually seen in practical work clothes, cut a striking figure in a new black suit, his expression solemn until the moment Gabriella appeared on the porch. The transformation, then, was remarkable, his face lighting with such joy that several guests were moved to tears by the naked emotion displayed by the normally reserved rancher. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt, with vows that spoke of partnership, respect, and enduring love. When Judge Anderson pronounced them husband and wife, Zachary's kiss left no doubt of his feelings, proprieties briefly forgotten in the moment of celebration. The feast and dancing continued well into the evening, with ranch hands and townspeople alike enjoying the rare opportunity for communal celebration. As dusk fell, lanterns were lit around the yard, creating pools of golden light where couples danced to Diego's violin and Tom's newly revealed talent with a harmonica. Gabriella and Zachary slipped away eventually, leaving the festivities to continue without them. They walked hand in hand to the small cabin Zachary had built at the edge of the property, their own private retreat away from the main house. "Welcome home, Mrs. Ryder," he said, lifting her easily to carry her across the threshold. Inside, the cabin was simply but beautifully furnished: a large bed with a colorful quilt, a stone fireplace, comfortable chairs, and shelves already lined with their favorite books. A fire had been laid ready, which Zachary quickly lit to ward off the evening chill. "It's perfect," Gabriella said, turning in a slow circle to take in every detail. "When did you find time to do all this?" "I had help," he admitted, coming to stand behind her, his arms circling her waist. "The men worked on it whenever I could spare them. Martha chose the furnishings. But the books, those I selected myself, one by one." She turned in his embrace to face him. "Thank you for this, for everything." "Thank you for saving me," he said softly. "Saving you?" she questioned. "You're the one who bought my freedom. And you're the one who showed me how to live again." He brushed a strand of hair from her face. "We saved each other, I think." There in the warm glow of firelight, they began their married life with tender words and gentle touches that gradually grew more passionate as the night deepened around their small haven of love. Epilogue: 5 years later, the summer sun cast long shadows across the ranch yard as Gabriella stood on the porch, watching Zachary teach their 3-year-old son, Thomas, to ride his first pony. The little boy sat proudly on the gentle creature's back, his father's hands securely holding him as they walked in slow circles. "Again, Papa," Thomas demanded when they completed the circuit. "Faster," Zachary laughed, the sound carrying easily to where Gabriella stood. "Not faster yet, cowboy. You need to learn balance first." Gabriella smiled, one hand resting on her swollen belly where their second child would make an appearance in approximately 2 months, according to Dr. Wilson's estimation. This pregnancy had been easier than her first, allowing her to continue most of her duties around the ranch until quite recently. The Ryder Ranch had prospered over the past 5 years. With Gabriella's assistance in the bookkeeping and business correspondence, they had expanded their operations, invested in better breeding stock, and even purchased the adjacent property when old Mr. Henderson decided to retire to California. Martha still ruled the kitchen, though she had gradually ceded more responsibilities to Gabriella and the young woman who had replaced Miss Lin after she departed for San Francisco 3 years earlier. The core group of ranch hands remained, with a few additions as operations expanded, creating an extended family bound by loyalty and shared purpose. Zachary completed the riding lesson and lifted Thomas from the pony, setting him on his shoulders for the walk back to the house. The boy giggled, his small hands gripping his father's hair for balance. "Mama, I rode Spirit all by myself," Thomas called out as they approached. "I saw you, sweetheart. You looked very brave," Gabriella replied, smiling at her son's exaggerated account of the closely supervised activity. Zachary set Thomas down on the porch. "Go wash up for supper," he instructed, "and tell Martha we'll be in shortly." The boy dashed inside, leaving his parents alone in the fading light. Zachary moved to stand beside Gabriella, one arm circling her shoulders as they watched the sun sink toward the distant mountains. "Happy?" he asked, a question he had taken to asking regularly since that long-ago conversation by the fire during the blizzard. "Completely," she answered truthfully, leaning into his solid warmth. "And you, more than I ever thought possible." He placed his free hand on her rounded abdomen, smiling when he felt movement beneath his palm. "Active today, like his father always in motion." "Or her mother always with a plan," he countered with a grin. They had chosen not to learn whether they were expecting a son or daughter, preferring the surprise. Thomas had been born almost exactly 9 months after their wedding, arriving with a lusty cry and his father's blue eyes. This child, they agreed, would be named Sarah if a girl, after Zachary's sister, or James if a boy, after Gabriella's father. "I received a letter from Miss Lin today," Gabriella said as they watched the last rays of sunlight paint the valley in gold. "She's married a merchant from her home village who also emigrated to San Francisco. They're expecting their first child this winter." "Good news," Zachary said. "She deserved happiness after everything she endured." Gabriella nodded, thinking of the frightened young woman they had brought to the ranch 5 years ago, and the confident, smiling bride pictured in the small photograph that had accompanied the letter. "Sometimes I think about that day in Rhyolite," she said softly. "How different everything might have been if you hadn't been there, if you hadn't bid for me." Zachary turned to face her fully, his expression serious. "I think about it too, how close I came to not going to town that day. I'd almost sent Diego instead. Why did you go?" She asked, curious about this detail he had never shared. He smiled slightly. "The night before, I dreamed about Sarah. She was telling me something important, but I couldn't hear her clearly. When I woke, I felt compelled somehow to go to Rhyolite myself." His hand caressed her cheek. "Now I wonder if she was leading me to you." The idea brought tears to Gabriella's eyes. "I wish I could have known her. She would have loved you," Zachary said with certainty. "Almost as much as I do." From inside came the sound of Thomas's excited chatter and Martha's patient responses, reminding them that supper would be waiting. "We should go in," Gabriella said, but neither moved immediately. Instead, Zachary bent to kiss her, a tender gesture filled with 5 years of shared life and the promise of many more to come. "Do you remember what I said to you that first day?" he asked as they finally turned toward the door. Gabriella smiled, the memory vivid despite the passage of time. "You'll rest in shade with me. The best promise I ever made," he said, leading her into the warm, bright house where their family waited. "And the easiest to keep." As the door closed behind them, the first stars appeared in the darkening sky over the Ryder Ranch, a home built not just of wood and stone, but of second chances, courageous choices, and a love that had begun in the most unlikely circumstances on a scorching noon in Rhyolite, Nevada territory.